think at this point in time, what I might hope to do is to introduce each of the panelists in. I'm going slower, so I know some of you are disappointed that I'm not wearing that suit, not the gangster suit I had on, but, you know. It was getting too hot. I was cooking.
I refuse to sit on the panel if he was wearing it.
That's true, it's true. You refuse. You see how he sat at the polar opposite end to me. Anyway, it's been a long journey, this panel, actually, because I think it began as an idea. And as I've been studying theory, capital T, I've learned that often there is no one story about how something came to be. And my memory of it was that there were at least 16 inconclusive meetings between academics discussing the potential for holding the Writing Racism and Resistance conference, and that it then morphed went through various changes and arrived eventually in 2013 at a panel that there may have been some impetus from some of the work, creative work that the people who were meeting had brought to the table. And I do believe that Taylor Moody had some memory of one of his novels being one of the source points of the subject of the debate. For myself, this part of the discussions I may have not heard or I may have omitted, but hopefully we can fill it eventually. But yeah, it was a great long journey of education for myself. You know, I learned so much in those meetings. But as an organizer, I started to get desperate for us to actually program the debate. So once we managed to do it in 2013, I thought, yeah, let's repeat it so that we can expand it and look at it from different angles. So I'm delighted, finally, to bring to you Khalid Mahmood, Rita Bano, Hafsah Bashir, and Martin De Mello. He just popped up, yeah. So, without further ado, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to bow out and allow Martin, who works with Conway, to chair the meeting, and I'll just chip in if I get the urge to But yeah, take it over, Martin.
Okay, thank you all for coming. My name is Martin De Mello. I work at Cultureword. I just had a year out. I came back to work on Thursday, and they asked me on Friday to do this. So I'm going to leave it mostly with the panel. So I guess this panel came out of a lot of discussions that Cultureword has been having about the reason why Cultureword exists, or Cultureword exists, and it's partly about the publishing industry, it's partly about writers, it's partly about editors, it's partly about how people are represented and why they're represented in the way that they are. So I'll invite each of the panelists to talk a bit about their own experience of what being a writer or an editor or being involved in the industry means for them, and the kind of issues that they've encountered through doing it. But so I thought I'd just start with Kavita, who edited a book, put together and edited a book called Too Asian, Not Asian Enough. So if just asking her to share a kind of experiences she had putting that together, both in terms of working with the writers, the rationale for it, and any issues that may have arisen or not have arisen with the publisher. So sorry to do some over to you.
So yes, I was involved in editing anthology called Too Asian, Not Asian Enough. It came out in 2011, and it came out after a few years of having conversations with different writers who were not able to get their work published, and finding that there's a certain kind of story that the publishers are looking for that we tend to see again and again. So they felt kind of stifled that they're supposed to reproduce a story like that. And this whole idea of commodification of British Asianness and British Asian identity, and this narrative that we all recognize and know of, second generation, wanting to kind of assimilate and being westernized or British, and their parents who were not allowing them for various reasons. The process of putting it together was interesting, and the title, Too Asian, Not Asian Enough, is kind of gives away this kind of the kind of responses that publishers will often give. But what I found from that process and afterwards is that most of the writers wanted to fit themselves into the not Asian enough bracket. So when I was trying to hold workshops and discussions afterwards as well, and the kind of stories we were receiving, there was a sense of responding to the suffocation of the stereotypes and the formulaic kind of narrative of saying, we're not British Asian writers, we're just writers. And a consequence of that is often that you want to erase anything of your kind of specificity. If you are South Asian, you don't want to write about South Asian issues, and you think that's a way of both avoiding those pitfalls, but also it's fine if that's what you want to write, but it can also come from a kind of internalized sense of inferiority as well. So often being a writer is not something neutral, but to write like a writer can be to write like a male or white, middle-class, heterosexual writer. So I think a lot of the time, unconsciously, writers feel that that is what it is to be a real writer. And I've been really interested in challenging how we can write about our lives, but do it in a way that avoids the stereotypes, even if those stereotypes are in some way connected to our lives. And my approach through my writing and through the work I've been doing, because I think that a lot of the time the conversation tends to remain at the level of publishing. So we've been hearing a lot about diversity again. We do regularly. People talk about diversity, why publishers are not interested in our work. And I first of all, I think we just held too hostage by waiting for others to approve and to accept us. But secondly, I think we need to dig a bit deeper and think about also what we're writing and how we're writing. So the process needs to start earlier than just the kind of, we want our books at Waterstones, we want publishers to publish our work. And I think this partly because of reading a lot of what is coming out, being published or not being published. So I think that one of the ways in which we can really change our writing and to write in a different way is to change who we're writing for. I think that we consciously, unconsciously end up a lot of the time writing for white readers. And I say this partly because I've done a thesis really examining a lot of British Asian literature and unpacking the ways in which it is very clearly directed towards white readers in terms of what is assumed, what is explained, that kind of white gaze. You end up simplifying, mocking, ridiculing your families and communities. And I think that if we write about our lives and we start writing for the people and communities that we're writing about, that is what we're writing about, something very radical happens in our work, which means that there's space for complexity, there's space for the layers, there'll be more compassion in our work, more investment. One of the things is that we shouldn't be kind of idolizing that there's no problems and everything is perfect, because we don't have caste, or we don't have racism within ourselves, or we don't have patriarchy, but we'll write about it differently if we're writing it for our communities and not kind of doing this white people save me from these barbarians that
Cultureword was released in 2011. So what was it? How was it marketed and what was its reception?
It was marketed as a literature from a new generation. I think I had some issues with how it was marketed as well. I think it was a really important and exciting kind of platform and opportunity. And it was, there's a publisher called Industry Press that published it, which isn't around anymore. And it was great to have her on board, but at the same time, I think that we weren't always getting it, and I think that sometimes there was a kind of I don't know if anybody's seen the front cover of the anthology. It had a lollipop and a jalebi on a stick photo. And I had a lot of problems with this because I was like, well, this is a visual representation of exactly what is being questioned in this anthology, which is this kind of binary and dichotomy that's really simplified. And it just was not a question. It was like, this is marketable, people will buy this. So these kind of issues are it was received very well as well.
In terms of what the wide presentation was?
It was covered. It got one edited review, lots of good reviews as well.
So just moving on, moving across, I need to Hafsah. So just picking up on that. So you're predominantly a spoken word artist. So you get, I guess, an immediate feedback from the audience. You also get an immediate feel of how things are being responded. How does that affect what you write? Are you writing what you want to write and performing what you want to perform? Or does the composition of the audience have an effect on what you choose to perform and how that's received? And what effect does that have on you as a writer?
I think for me, my whole writing process started off as something really cathartic. And as I was growing up, I used to write about my inner anxieties, and like most people do, most people start writing. But for me, I think the moment that I started to share my work, I realised there was something more to this. That when I eventually did start interrupting spaces and having a platform where my voice was heard, for me it was very important that the right message did come across. And because I was being represented, I'm obviously a person of colour, I'm brown, I'm female, I'm Muslim, and since the war on terror, I think if I don't speak for myself, then I've seen way too often other people speaking for me. So in that sense, I know that when I first come up on stage, there is this judgment already. People already assume what they think, the preconceptions they have about my culture, about myself, that I must be traditionally submissive, and it's turned into kind of duty for me to make sure that my message comes across, and most of that is my own writing, my own experience. When I tackle people that try and say to me that, well, actually, they try and deny my experience. For instance, when I was writing things about Islamophobia, which is so prevalent at the moment in our society, and it's affecting a lot of people. We were sharing it, we were organising an event as part of Manchester Muslim Writers, and we put it out on social media, and within 10 minutes we've been bombarded by these texts and tweets that there is no such thing as Islamophobia. And for me, I was thinking that, how can, a whole class of people or a whole race of people be speaking for me? So part of my writing process is to write about how I feel, what I've gone through, and I don't really look too deeply into who I'm writing for, because I think there's a danger in that. If I start doing that, I think that would really affect my integrity, because I'll start thinking too much about how my writing's coming across, the content of it. Is it too exotic for you? Is my authentic, something that you're going to romanticize, or it's going to be interpreted in a different way? If I get lost in that, I end up not saying what I really want to say.
Do you feel that you have control over how you are received to an extent, or are you only writing as you know, and then that reception depends a lot on the audience, depends a lot on the context? Is there anything that you can do that declares who you are, declares what your position is?
I think through my writing, for me, first and foremost, is to, if I can walk away having that feeling that I've informed them of something they didn't know before, clear misconceptions, without being a totem or without being a spokesperson for my community. Because really, sometimes I just want to speak for myself. What was your question again?
So, is there anything you have? degree of control over that, a degree of control over how you approach the audience and the extent to which they may receive you. So are you able to declare your position, for example, and make that unambiguous, or is that something that you try and do, or are you by default, for example, just by speaking, positioned as a radical or an outsider?
Yeah, definitely, especially coming from a community like mine, where traditionally women are not heard, and we do have issues within our own culture where, for instance, certain topics or certain subjects are not to be spoken about, especially by a woman that's standing on stage in front of lots of people. So in that sense, the very mere fact that I've got that platform to speak, I think, speaks volumes anyway, and then the content just does the rest.
So just bringing Tarek in, I can't remember, are you in the third novel now? So, yeah, phones are gone. So, from your point of view, Tarek, I know you've had various issues, problems in terms of finding a publisher, in terms of the way that your work is viewed before you even get to it. So, to what extent do you think that is due to your subject matter? To what extent is that due to the way, to the characters that you write about? And to what extent is that down to there not being a market for it, or just being the outright prejudice of the industry and not willing to listen to what you have to hear?
Thank you, Martin. It's great to be put into a stereotypical position right at the beginning. I love it for that. As we're discussing stereotypes and the issue, I'll come to your point in a minute. How many of you in here are writers? Look, how many of you thought of writing who didn't put your hands up? Come on, there can't be anybody in here who's not thought of writing. Who writes about love? Come on. Who writes about love? Who's been in love? We all live in times of war, and we all live in times of love. That's what I write about. The only difference is the characters that I compose are not necessarily those that fit into the Western concept of a stereotypical character. All characters by definition are stereotypical. But we are also, what do we live in? At the moment, I am a walking terrorist. It's not me who define myself as that terrorist. I write for children. This conference, actually, Kavita, has running a web page called Racism, Writing and Resistance, is born out of the work that Peter and I were doing. Why non-white children are not in front of children's novels? Why not? The reason for that is the publishers believe what black faces do not sell. It's as simple as that. It's an economic position. We are the ones, me and you, have gone grey, you've gone bald a bit less than me. In the process...
Please look at that, Don.
The reason for that, Mr. Kalu, is when you have more hair on your arms, then your head is no more so it's gone. However, we have sat with all the champions and presidents of the industry of publishing. They have led us up a bullshit garden path. When anybody talks about diversity, it is an acceptance of racism. It means society has failed. We are not diverse people. We are people. Something has fundamentally gone wrong, Martin, in a world that wants to start looking at us. And when white people look at us, they look at us as exoticized, orientalized creation. Last night, in your drunken state, the person next to you said, "What do you do?" He said, "Have you heard of Laos?" The guy with the hat. He says, "I have." He goes, "I take photographs there." I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Wales." I said, "Tell me about Wales." He goes, "No, there's nothing there." I said, "Don't tell me about Laos. I can't stand anymore the orientalization that we see." So where do we come back to? What I wrote, a first novel in 1983 called Hand on the Sun. I was in jail on charges of terrorism. I wanted to write my story down. I did not write a story of Muslim characters. Yet I wrote a story of Muslim characters because they were in there. There were Sikhs, there were Hindus, there were Christians, there were atheists. Yet when the write-ups come now in 2015, it's supposed to be the first Muslim novel written. Novels don't have religion. It's nonsense. The second novel, a couple of decades later, my character happened to be Muslim, but it was called Salim Khan the Muslim. this was by our good friend, no, not right. Yeah, the publisher the Guardian. Yeah, and now Peter pointed out that actually I've ended up writing about war. You're Not Proper is about two girls living and trying to work out what on earth is going on in a town seething with Islamophobia. And the next novel coming out, which was very difficult to publish, even when I had publishers, because it is a novel, the current one is out very soon, but in Montreal, not here. Even though I have a wonderful agent, even though it was accepted by publishers more than once, but it wasn't published. Because my character believes, and is on a road, it's a question I pose to you, why should any of you live in peace when my world is burning? Why? We are part of the same world. I've just traveled here from Beirut. You have never had one day without war. Not now, not in the last 400 years, because the British Army has been somewhere or other engaged in some military action or another. We are a constant process of that war. So what do we do in terms of the construction of characters? We can't construct, we're writing novels. Ours is a panorama in which we ask our readership to suspend their disbelief. So in that suspension of disbelief, we are not creating creative non-fiction. We're creating fiction because we want to create a world which makes more sense than this senselessness, which we can't understand. In trying to understand the world, we take positions in that world. I take a position in the world I live in. I believe literature has a role in that world, just as it fulfilled the role of imperialism, and it's continued to fill the role of imperialism. It justifies the destruction of Libya in 1,000 different ways. It justified the enslavement of Africa, whether it be through the literatures of the Heart of Darkness. It occupied us, whether it be Jungle Book or 1,000 other nonsensical stuff that comes about. And that literature from the Western upper elite position is unchanged. The only thing that has happened is that Malcolm X's house slaves, what he termed house Negroes, have become highly educated. Not only can they sit in the White House, they can only now produce fantastic works of literature. The Indians are selling pornography by the bucket load. The Pakistanis are talking to their reluctant masters. It doesn't really end. The West, they're talking to the West as if they don't know them. Well, I am the West. I live here. I live in Beirut under the feet of the beast. I come here, I live in its belly. I am the West. That which I write, I wish to challenge the very existence of the system, and literature plays a role in it. Because it's in the, not only was Ngugi so brilliantly right when he talked about the decolonization of the mind, our imaginations are being colonized. Our children's literary world, I can't finish it.
No, I'll ask you mine, maybe you'll be in a
Yeah, our children's minds have been colonized, imaginations being colonized, because less than 2 to 3% of children's literature is non-white. It's a disgrace. Even Mallory Blackman, do you remember how tearful I was? All tearful. It didn't take me long to get tearful, but I became so upset when she said that she had to make her characters white. She wanted to make money out of writing, but she couldn't do it. They wouldn't publish black children's characters. It's a disgrace, but it's a disgrace that will not change, not now, not in 10 years' time, not in 20 years' time, unless we, the writers, the people of this town, actually disregard the things that bind us down. I'm going to finish my talk on a poem by Masisi Kuneni, but I'd like to say just 1 or 2 more little points on this, and that is to Martin's question. Is it marketable what we do? No, it's not. I write nonsense nobody wants to read. I understand that. Why would you want to publish my book in which the characters said, slit their throats, blow up their houses? Why should they live in peace when I am burning? When you've killed my children, why should yours walk down the street? Why should my houses be destroyed and yours standing? Why should I live in the darkness and you in the light?
I don't agree though. I don't agree.
Let me finish, you can do that. So you can do that, what you like. The role of literature, in my opinion, is predefined, but what we do within it is our position. I take you to 1967. There was an Afro-Asian writers' movement where we were just emerging from the colonial world. And in that world, people dreamed dreams of a better world, a world free from racism, a world in which we could control our past to control our present and affect the future. So I'm going to finish on this, so you can sense an anger and emotion within what I say. But let me take you back to 67. He's a South African
When
writer.
do I get to speak, sir?
After I finish, yes. If you interrupt me once more, I'll start again.
Here we go.
Okay, so I finish now. Kunini, he was part of the struggle. ANC is quite a leading figure, a prolific poet, and he was exiled and later on went back. He's dead now. He wrote, "Was I wrong when I thought all shall be avenged?" This is 1967, 68. It was published in Beirut and Cairo, from where I bring you this. "Was I wrong when I thought all shall be avenged? Was I wrong when I thought the rope of iron holding the neck of young bulls shall be avenged? Was I wrong when I thought the orphans of sulfur shall rise from the ocean? Was I wrong when I thought there need not be love, there need not be forgiveness, there need not be progress, there need not be goodness on earth, there need not be towns of skeletons sending messages of elephants to the moon? Was I wrong to laugh asphyxiated ecstasy when the sea rose like quicklime, when ashes on ashes were blown by the wind, when the infant sword was left alone on the hilltop? Was I wrong to erect monuments to blood? Was I wrong to avenge the pillage of Caesar? Was I wrong, was I wrong, was I wrong to ignite the earth and advance above the stars? Watching Europe burn with its civilization of fire, watching America disintegrate with its gods of steel, watching the persecutors of mankind turn to dust. Was I wrong, was I wrong? We have to create characters that right the wrongs of the present.
Okay, before we do leave, I just want to give a couple and Hafsah an opportunity to respond. So, to what extent do you agree with what Tariq has said? But also, what does that mean? What implications does that have for all the writers in the room, for anyone who's not yet published, who's trying to get published, and only just starting out writing?
I agree with her, and I think too much of the time our conversations are about getting published, and not that that's not an important point, and of course getting our work out there is important, and of course publishers are not interested in our work, but we also really have to think about what we're writing as well. As Tariq is saying, I think what Tariq is talking about is this idea of literature as being it's kind of mythologized as something sacred and something that is untouchable, something that is separate from the world. So this is a myth. I mean, someone like Edward Said and Orientalism has, broken that down and talked about how literature and its representation by the West has played a role in colonialism, imperialism, war. At the same time, and it's interesting that Said himself, being a product of kind of literature departments and humanities, defended Rushdie on the basis of freedom of speech and the sanctity of literature. So that whole debate starts to rest on literature as something that is sacred, while you're critiquing faith, and saying nothing should be sacred. So connected to this is this, like we've got this Lionel Shriver debate. Do any of you know about that? And the kind of things that she said in that speech are really problematic, but it's the kind of things that people have been saying for many, many, many years. It's just that now people are starting to, and I think the internet has a big role to play, people are starting to call it out, that you can't just represent who you want, how you want, from your position of privilege, and then talk about freedom of speech. Censorship happens at all stages, who is published, what is published, but it's only when people who have that power and that voice and that platform, and you will represent, if you are representing from that position the other, people of other races and religions, and you know nothing about their lives, your prejudices will come through, your arrogance, your assumptions. You should be prepared for people to critique that and question that and to challenge you on it, which is starting to happen more and more. And also, okay, while we've been represented in these ways, with somebody like Lionel Shriver, at the same time, because everything we're reading represents us in that way, we could end up also continuing to represent ourselves in these ways. So, connected to the title of the panel, does literature represent racism? And this is what Darlie is saying as well. Yes, it does. I can list a whole lot of books which we celebrate and we think, great, we've got a voice now in this whole mix of post-colonial literature departments that we're writing back. Kite Runner is propaganda, Persepolis, a whole number of all these British Asian writers that I've been studying, the whole narrative of assimilation and becoming British as the kind of normative perspective, and everything that is other, your families, your communities are backward, traditional, they don't learn English, they should integrate. These are all racist stories, and yet we all think, wow, this brown writer, this is something to celebrate, this is a great thing, we're being represented, but it's actually negative. So for the writers in the room, going back to your question, I would say that writing is political, and we should never ever forget that, and just as much as the whole importance of getting published is the importance of self-interrogation, because if we do not interrogate ourselves, what we write will be sexist, it will be homophobic, and it will be racist. And even if we're people of colour, you know, with that white supremacy will be there in our work unless we really interrogate ourselves. So I think that process is just as important as talking about diversity. And obviously diversity hasn't got us anywhere, because as we're saying, that there is literature, some literature by people of colour, but it's actually seems to be part of the same tradition of representation when white people are representing us. So something is going wrong and we need to step outside of those frameworks.
So we seem to be very agree that literature does perpetuate racism. So what does that mean for us as individual practitioners? I don't know how so people answer that. So for everyone in the room, it's like, it's the industry and the wider society and the vested interest in people being viewed in a particular way. They perpetuate that, they reinforce that. When you write a piece and you stand before an audience, to what extent has that whole process brought you to the moment that you're about to speak and your decisions about what you are going to say?
Well, I think for me, I think that whole platform is all about challenging those stereotypes and challenging those those representations of ourselves. So I agree with everything that you were saying there. It's always refreshing to be able to come across books or stories that move away from that whole really narrow tropes of culture gap stories, or arranged marriages, or all the themes that you keep reading about, where people want to represent us in the wrong way. So I don't know. I agree with what you were saying.
So then, how do you cope? This wrong. When you get a negative response, how do you respond to that?
I don't think I have had a negative response in that sense, because I think people are quite open to listening to a different perspective, especially when you're speaking from that community, you're speaking from that, you're at grassroots level, you're from there, so I don't think that they can deny what you're saying, so that I was just
thinking earlier on, you were saying that when we were talking about Islamophobia.
Yeah, the Islamophobia, yeah.
Then there was a negative response.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that response?
I just carry on doing what I'm doing, to be honest. I just carry on doing what I'm doing.
So you do that in terms of you as an individual?
As an individual, yeah, as an individual.
It's bad. Mr. Callum, time to deal with it.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring to the table some of the experiences we have as writers and maybe as publishers, and even Cultureword as an organiser of literature and literature activism and literature development. And one of the amusing experiences in a kind of sardonic way that myself and I believe Martin had was we ran a competition for, let's say, for stories, and we got lots and lots of entries. And before we sent those stories off to the publishers for them to select which they thought was the most promising story, we read them, analysed them for what we felt was literary quality and what we felt was, let's call it salience to publishers. And we placed our bets, I can't for confidentiality reasons, but we placed our bets on a story in which you have this white hero riding into a faraway country and rescuing a situation in which lots of black people or non-black people were in trouble. And it wasn't well written. You know, we both agreed it wasn't well written. But we thought, they'll love that story. And lo and behold, how long did it take them? 3 months later they wrote back saying, you know, there's some really good writing in this bunch of work that you sent us. But you know the story we want is that one, you know? And that made it more real to me. That, you know, you can write as well as you like, but there is an imagined audience that the publishers have. And that imagined audience is who they're serving. And one last example, again, anonymizing the data, as they say. I submit work both to publishers and to agents. And sometimes, I know, Tarek, you've had some conversations with agents. We've shared conversations with agents. And one agent...
Shared a bit more than that, please.
One of them said, well, you know, you've got a really great set of characters. Can you make one of them white? You know, that'll help us sell it. And I thought, I wonder if other writers, white writers, get this request, you know, can you make one of your characters black? I was like, you know, to me, the characters were the characters. You know, I don't go in there thinking, oh, I'm going to write a black character. But it was a really strange request. And I thought the way in which it was said was that, you're now in the inner circle. We will reveal the inner knowledge. And that is, you have to sell your soul a little to get in there. Which is the Mallory Blackman thing about, you know, in her case, you know, they wanted, I think it has changed, but they wanted white characters from her, you know. And so one of the research things I started doing was working out what strategies writers adopt when they're faced with that kind of barrier. They're great writers, but the publishers and the agents, in various means, usually they talk about quality, usually they might talk about the texture of your novel or the need for some contrast or whatever. There's language they will use to tell you it's not ready for our imagined audience. And the dilemma you have is whether you go with that and, you know, you restructure it. So that, for instance, I'll give you one technique if you want to try and use it. One technique that is often used is they delay what I call the reveal that the character is black. So they write a character that can run as white for quite a few chapters. They believe that then the audience, the readership, will engage with that character, will bond with that character, so they won't mind when they find out they're black. Whereas if you actually stick the character as black right in chapter 1, then they won't buy the book. You know, these are these crude analyses that take place within the industry. And the question for an author or a writer, I was talking to Barry Wright about it as well, you know, he's talking about it. It's once you're aware of it, what do you do? How do you respond? So that was my toughness to it.
Well, I guess just to add a little bit to that in a slightly different context, we ran a different competition in which a publisher and an agent were involved, and the prize giving was in Manchester. They came up, there were a lot of black writers there. They basically asked, well, why aren't there any black writers being published by yourselves? Why aren't you interested in black writing? And the line they kept coming back with was, well, essentially that they were colourblind, but the book had to have a good hook. If it didn't have a good hook, then they wouldn't take it on, regardless of the quality of the writing. But I don't know what this magical hook was. No one explained what the hook in a text is supposed to be. So if you are black and you are interested in what it means to be black, then the argument from the floor was that is hook enough. That's what we want to. We want to see ourselves in the literature. From their point of view, that wasn't what the hook was. But they wouldn't declare what it actually meant. I'm still none the wiser. I think Bob can help it. So I guess from the point of view of anyone that was attending there, you're a writer, you have ambitions to be published. Does that mean that you have to give up your ambition to become part of the industry, or do you have to try and discover what this hook is? So, talking on a personal level, and I'll just throw this over.
Perhaps we could ask the audience, give them a chance. We're running out of time.
Yeah. So, just talking on a personal level, it's like, so what kind of experiences have people had? What are the kind of difficulties that they have encountered, or you, the audience, have encountered within it? And what's the way forward? And I guess that's a question more for the panel than for you, but if you put forward the issues that you've had, then let's see if the panel can come up with, let's make them work for us again.
I'll just share a response I got. I finished a draft of a novel that I've kind of been working on for about 10, 15 years. And part of it is the journey of like changing my writing and thinking about seeing how I was writing for my readers. This is why I feel passionately about this, and how my writing changed as I stopped doing that and started writing for the people I'm writing about. And I sent it to a few agents, and I haven't tried very hard after that. And one of the responses I got, I think she was quite frank, unlike the others, but she said she found it interesting, and she said, I wish I had seen it at an earlier stage in the process, because things like there's too many characters here, there's too many Indian words, there's too much faith and customs and daily practices. I mean, basically she felt excluded from the text because she could sense that it was not written for her. And you're so used to everything being made accessible to you, whether it's through a white character or whether it's through a character who is white in every way except skin color, some entry point, and my work does not have that. And that's what she was trying to kind of say. She said, yeah, you're using too many Indian words.
I had something very similar when I was, for my undergrad dissertation, I actually wrote a memoir of my nan's story, where she was 17 at the time of the partition. And I ended up having 2 supervisors that year, and one of them was white male, and the other one was Afro-Caribbean older lady. And the differences in the advice that they gave me were unbelievable, because obviously the white male was saying to me that there's just too many authentic references in here that people are not going to be able to understand. Maybe you need to have a glossary, maybe you need to italicize those, maybe you need to just take them out. And I couldn't get my head around the fact that if I take those things out, for me, that's not the way that I want her story to be told. Whereas my other supervisor was just saying, her advice to me was, don't you dare change anything. You know, you write the story the way you want to write it. People will understand. They will read through it. They will get the essence of what it is that you want to say. So it's finding that balance, I think, that is really, really difficult. And then what do you do with that?
I was going to ask, when you're trying to keep your writing authentic, how are you managing to sustain yourself in the meantime, knowing that the public getting published is quite similar to people kind of trying to do it to a universal audience?
I don't think writing is a career, to be honest. I don't think it pays unless you hit mainstream, publishing houses, and that's the way people make their money. I think a lot of writers, especially Bain writers, have got something else going on the side as well, and that doesn't get recognised. There's a lot more pressure for people to try and make a breakthrough. I don't know whether you find that.
Actually, I don't think this idea of a professional writer is really such a great thing. I've often wondered, I mean, if you are locking yourself away and sitting in a room and just writing, what do you write about? Like, what is your material? I think actually the writers I see who have become professional writers, as their career goes on, their writing becomes more and more soulless, disconnected from the world, narcissistic. So I think that it's actually a good thing to negotiate ways of earning a living in the world as well as writing.
You're saying in order to be a good writer, you must not be a successful writer.
No, but
what is success? I mean,
it does the drop care about itself being a drop when it knows it's going to expand the ocean. And in a sense, that's where we are. What we produce, and it has its effect in time.
So I guess something that follows on from that, I've been to a workshop with it was interesting, there were writers from London and writers from Manchester, and most of the writers from Manchester worked a job, because you've got to, and then there seemed to be a slight shift in London. There seemed to be a sense that they were entitled to earn a living as a writer. So, and I don't know if that's an actual obstacle to you in order to produce your work, because if you feel that sense of entitlement, then you have to buy into the idea that you are able to sell X number of copies, so you're brought into an audience.
I think the ways that we are encouraged to see ourselves as professional writers and what we then do to earn money ends up responding to these constant funding bids and commissions, and I think that can really, you just end up dancing to what other people want you to do. people try and live a life of a professional writer. You're actually just, okay, now they want me to write about terrorism, or they want me to write about honor killings, and they want me to do a workshop on this. So you're kind of in a cycle, which I don't think is necessarily good. You want to write something that you want to write.
Any other questions?
I just had a point about with the rise of sort of more translated works and works from other cultures and countries sort of penetrating into Western audiences, what you guys thought of, how does that tally with second generation, third generation, that perspective, and whether publishing sort of houses or institutions or whatever, do they think that sort of giving a platform to those sort of translated or works from other countries as the nobler thing to do or publish rather than the second generation? As in, do they think it's one or the other? Just interested to know.
Publishers?
Yeah, would they see it as one or the other sort of?
So then they would publish a translated work in
over
from
the
UK.
Yes.
One of the things about the discussion that we're having, we're stuck in the realm. It's a very important point that you're making. Literature has forever been translated, forever, right the way through all millenniums, right the way back in history, ideas going backwards and forwards. This fascination with publishers or not, this is modern.
Yeah.
When writers in Africa and Asia wrote, they didn't write for anyone, they wrote for themselves and their own respective communities, very often publishing themselves. Then they didn't have the internet. I think perhaps what would be more important if we discuss in the realm of ideas, we're sitting in a panel discussing the question of stereotyping. Stereotyping is by definition a political process in a very clear-cut, oppressive, class-based, imperialist-based system in which we all live. And perhaps, that's the area. The publishers themselves are only powerful because they have an economic wealth. But there's 101 publishers. Every single writer today can reach some degree of their readership. That was not the case until very long ago. Therefore, I think we should think into the realm of back into the realm of ideas. And yes, the question of translation is very, very important, because translation isn't simply the question of language, it's also experience. The poem I read to you was the first time it was published in Arabic, in English, in French, in a way, because these writers from South Africa were trying to talk to the ones in Vietnam. They were having to go through Cairo and Beirut, because that's the way that history at that time moved forward, and avoid the entrance of the West. Global South was beginning to find its voice, and we live in fantastic times. We are not beholden to a handful of imperial powers that determine whether we can say what we wish to say or not. That era is gone, it's never coming back. So let's get back into the realm of ideas. What are the ideas that need to be fighting today? Well, that's my suggestion, not to me. And what's your opinions? You heard loads from us. What are your
I just want to share an experience, because what you're saying regarding how important is that as a writer with different ethnicities, just mainly Black and Asian. I just give you an example. I'm not a writer, but if you don't write about these issues, something will go wrong. For example, I'm an Iranian. I went to a film festival about Iran, which was wrong. So I was the only Iranian there. I witnessed that festival, and then I had to tell even the professor and the panel that how they went wrong, and they were like, oh, oops, but the event was mainly happening. So if I just believe that the importance of a conference like this, if the writer doesn't write about it, and if the people doesn't get the knowledge, things will go wrong. That, for example, as a Middle Eastern person, I go to a film festival about my own country, which I grew up in, which is totally wrong because they didn't understand it, and what is the reason? So the publishers get things make it difficult, which I think if you look at how important it is for writers like you to write about it, to just make the society aware, and I just wanted to share this experience with you.
So I guess a question that kind of arises from all of this is, so really it's one about our way forward. What do we as black writers, what should we be able to do?
Right.
Well,
Really, right.
But beyond that, in terms of audience, each writer is a potential audience, so should we be putting more effort into reading each other's work, to supporting each other, to building a separate black economy, if you like? So what are for the writers here, if you feel that what you want to do is to write as you are, how you are, in whatever way is important to you, and you know that the mainstream publishers are not going to take that on, what's your next step once you've finished the writing?
First, I think I should let everyone in the room know that we are working in cooperation with Penguin for their Write Live Now program. I forgot to mention it. And they are searching for become diverse writers. However, that's come through. Their cut-off point is 25th of October. We've got a leaflet somewhere in the background that you can check. And that's one way forward. The question whether it will open doors for many people or not, sometimes I feel that those who've been around a long time may have seen quite a few of these initiatives, and they often serve purposes other than actually discovering the writers. But one hopes, and sometimes you think it's a foolish hope, but you still hope that this time it will happen.
You said that 20 years ago.
But I was at the talk on theatre, which Benji Reed was on the panel, and he talked about how he could get no purchase from publishers in the theatre now, but for producing theatres, and so he began to devise an art form of his own and he created a theatre out of his own living room, and he produced things, and he took back his creative process and stopped, instead of knocking on the doors and begging all these others. And I thought that was quite an empowering thing to do. Second thing I heard today was from, I'm looking to you there, but Anton Marx. Anton Marx, a science fiction writer, and we go back a while. We've both written science fiction, and we've both struggled to get huge sales being taken up by mainstream publishers. But Anton was starting to go through with me how he promotes his novels and the method of getting your reviews on Amazon, how you promote the sales, etc., etc. And after a while I thought, this man, he's thought about this far more deeply than myself. And again, he was quite inspiring in that he'd taken back control over his promotion, over his audience, over finding people who wanted to read what he was writing. He's bypassing the whole industry. And I thought that's another great thing. So from my point of view, those two models, the Benji Reed model of, you can create your stuff without needing the mainstream publishers to approve you. And the Anton, a digital age understanding of how you can get your stuff out, not on paper necessarily, but through the internet, and build your audience and get your ideas out there. Those are two great ways forward. And there is the Penguin way as well, which we'll see about. So that's my choice.
There is another alternative, sorry, because a lot of that's happening in Africa, where African writers are taking back control, especially because one of the biggest problems with African writers from Africa is distribution. So you could be a South African writer, but your work will never be read in Nigeria or Kenya or any other Anglophone country within Africa because of the problem with distribution. So writers are taking back control by, once the rights within their own country are over, they take back and then they get books printed in another African country themselves and then have them distributed through different networks. That's one thing. The other thing is not just Penguin now, because we've got Cassava Republic that's opened in a branch in the UK, a Nigerian-based publisher, and I think that was a massive move that a company, a publisher from Africa, had the ball or the guts, however you want to look at it, to open a branch in the UK to distribute African work. So from the diaspora and from the continent as well. And not just African writers, anyone can submit to them, and they have open submissions, so you don't have to have an agent to submit to the South Republic. And they print and distribute in the UK, as well as they have now established links with the US and South Africa. So interestingly, through Cassava, Nigerian writers will now be available in South Africa. And South African writers, I imagine, if they publish through Cassava as well, could ideally be published in the UK or the US or anyone else. So there are lots of people who are, or writers and publishers who are really fed up with the status quo. You spoke about your dissertation being rejected, or not rejected, but criticized for different reasons and use of local language or too many characters because our families are so big, that kind of thing. My work was published in South Africa. When I approached UK publishers, it was like, that was exactly, and this was 10 years ago, it was the exact same response. Oh, you write very well, but, you know, there is no focus. So we don't want to hear your stories, it's too difficult for us to figure out what's going on, that kind of thing. So I don't think that attitude is going to change, but I think our attitude as writers, as publishers, as editors, as people involved in literature, that's the thing that needs to change. And this massive shift is happening within Africa. I'm very involved in Pan-African writing initiatives there. And it's happening on the continent, and I think it's going to happen in the diaspora as well.
Even, I think, take your point forward, that my new book is coming out with the Raja Press, which comes out of Bambazuka. Then the thing who start off in Nairobi, then set up, that's Firoz Manji and people, they set up then in Montreal. And also, I think we also should think that the world we live in is a bit bigger than Blighty, in which we're stuck. That actually Africa, I was taken aback when somebody asked me, what do you think the population is? I never believed it was 1.1 billion and above. 1.1 billion is not something to be trifled with. It doesn't matter how much destruction. The world's dynamics are changing right in front of us. And in that way, you know, as people, it's also, I just want to have two little things. Somebody was saying about writers. You know, fundamentally, I think the storytellers, you know, how whether it's good or bad is another issue. It's all subjective. And the other point I wanted to add was on this idea, we don't need diversity. I've completely gone so much against it. We need anti-racism. Diversity is what acceptance of white supremacy. Where we all are, come on, let's get your experiences out. You're wonderful people. You have magical experiences. Each one of you has a story of the world we live in, a story of its time. It needs to be told. You have the ability to tell it. It deserves to be told. And there's people who want to hear it. We don't need to wait beyond that which is necessary to write.
And there is this massive movement now, people like you were saying, taking control back. You know, there are loads of independent publishers out there. You know, there's Lemn Press, there's another one, Darlie Publishing, and they've just released a book called Love Across a Broken Map, and published 5 South Asian women's stories that move away from these narratives that we've been listening to for decades now. And it's refreshing. They've got dark, gritty, you know, really funny characters in there that don't conform to this narrow trope that we keep coming across. But even apart from that, social media is so massive at the moment that I know there's online digital forums where people can post their work on there, and they end up having a big following, so they don't have to finish their script. They just put chapters on there and end up having readers responding to their writing, and that's another way of people getting their work out there and getting the feel of what the readers want, but also, you know, getting your own stories across. So I think there's lots of different ways. It's slow in coming, but there are lots of different ways for people to be sharing their writing, especially when they're thinking about getting published.
Didn't 50 Shades of Grey come off though?
Yeah.
I thought there was something going on.
So, but where does that leave each one in the room as a writer? So do we each have an individual responsibility, or should we be trying to work more collectively to forward all of our interests? Was there another question?
I think there's a question.
Yeah.
Well, Helen mentioned this issue of symbology that I have been frustrated throughout this year in UK doing my master. It's Black and Asian, and I know that Asian in the UK only South Asian, and to the fact that I've been frustrated that in here Asian doesn't mean East Asian, and in this evening Lucy Shane, who performed, and she has been saying that East British, East Asian are a minority within a minority. So I was wondering, how do you think about it?
That's such an important question, you know. Actually, I find the title of this conference ridiculous. It's called Black and Asian. It's so absurd. Black is a political color, Asian is a geographical entity. Not very long ago, we Africans and Asians called ourselves black. White was a political identity. It was whiteness that was a problem. Not long ago, Arabs, Southeast Asians, East Asians, actually we did not define ourselves. First, we were defined by the society in which we lived. We didn't choose to be black. We didn't. I was called a Paki when I first came. I had no idea that's what I was, even a Pakistani, let alone the golden phrase of Paki. So in one sense, what the last question has raised is really important. Because when we, so in case white people think, I'm anti-white, I'm not, I'm anti-whiteness. That in that sense, the question for us are really fundamental and simple. You know, it's a question of our identity, our belonging. And when we fragmented in this, we lost a movement in this country, which was a black movement. It did not denigrate, it did not divide us. Indians and Pakistanis were still Indians and Pakistanis, whilst being Asians and black. We didn't have that as a division. This is a division partly raised by funding agencies. We haven't mentioned the fact that we can't write the prevent agenda watches you. We are being spied on, our children, our hospitals, our schools, everything in that. So to your point, actually, in this white world, we are all part and parcel of the same divide. And now, on top of that divide, we've become Muslims. That's all that's happened. The Paki has become a Muslim. I have my Indian and Sikh friends have been called Muslim bastards and Osamas because they were wearing had beards. You know, they can be disliked for lots of other reasons, but you know, that particular one was racism. So we've had one layer of racism built up about the other. And the anti-Chinese and anti-Southeast Asian racism has its own breed in this country as well. I met a South Korean woman. She was in tears of the way that she was treated in Bristol. I met her in Portugal recently. She was absolutely devastated. About every few minutes it was the yellow peril, it was the yellow devil, it was something. She goes, I can't believe I couldn't escape from it. The intensity is still here, it's just changed. So I'm really glad that you've raised the point. All of us need to rethink that process, and hopefully Cultureword will change that view next time.
I don't want to get into the definitions, you know, the dictionary definitions of black or Asian. I will answer briefly.
It's political definition.
Yes, fine, but the thing is, we'll get dragged down and it will suck out all the rest of the time. And we're here to look to what we can do in terms of moving forward for the right. But what I would say is that, as a linguist, I will say that sometimes words, they change their meaning, and the meaning that you want them to have, and the meaning that you insist they have, the world ignores you and carries on and uses it in a different way. So what happened, from our point of view, from the organisational point of view, is we called it the Black Writers Conference. Then we got phone calls. We got phone calls from many, many people saying, can Asian people come too? Now, I took the decision that we need to make clear that this embraces Asian. And if this word black no longer can do that, because it could do it in the 80s, that was around then, if it can no longer do that, we have to accept the linguistic fact that that word is no longer able to express the meaning we wanted. That is all I'm saying about that, because I don't want to get bogged down into that debate, because that debate, Maya Angelou said something very, very, very succinct, which is why I like it. She said, you know, we all know what we mean. You know, let's not get trapped into that distraction. Okay? So that's where I feel that the debate that we have today should look at what we can do. We all know who we are in one way or another.
What would people think about some kind of writers' union? So, I don't know, you pay a subscription what you can afford, and that would help develop you, sustain you, get like support around you if you're having issues, use it to highlight issues. I don't know how it would work. It's a very big question.
Well, I guess part of the issue is, like, for example, diversity. One of the things that underlies diversity is the whole point about division, as opposed to unity. So everyone has become very divided. So the idea of a union, for me, is a good idea. How it would work I don't know, and I guess what the take forward for me, I'll just ask people now, we're running out of time, but I guess what part of the take forwards for me is we have a responsibility in the room, not just individually, but collectively. And this panel discussion is just a starting point, it's a point of departure. So I'll ask everyone to do a takeaway in a second, but just one more question.
Just one really quick point. I think what has been said about publishers that are coming out that are not the non-mainstream, and as writers we have a responsibility to be very good readers as well. So it's, I think for me, one of the big takeaways is to put our money where our mouth is. So go to these places, find them, seek them out and support them, and make it so that they cannot be ignored. Make it so that there is a market, that is a tidal wave that grows. Get your mums and your aunties and your dads and your brothers reading and not buying from Amazon. You know, supporting these and growing these businesses so that they can in turn grow us.
I guess, it's like people pay £100 for a pair of trainers or £1,000 for a TV, but for a book. So just we're wrapping up now. I'd just like to ask each of the panel just what their takeaway for the audience would be. So,
I think you're a wonderful audience from the questions that we've had, and I think you should take away the incredible validity of your own experiences, and we have the self-confidence to say that my experience is important, it'll be written down, let it be the drop. The ocean will drop.
Just responding to that idea of a writers' union, having tried to get writers together, and I think what was really frustrating is that there's this idea of being a writer which is separate from kind of politics or talking about ideas or having the conversations that we're having. And I think that the foundation for any kind of collective movement, publishing, initiative needs to be political. And I think that often, because everything is giving us this message of just writing as something separate from politics, and I kind of floundered in my attempts to bring writers together, because in the end they just wanted to take any opportunity they could, and it's fine, but nothing changes. So
I was thinking that if we had a union, we wouldn't have to just take whatever opportunities that we wanted, that we could. I know there's going to be people.
But I feel like there needs to be a lot of, just like feminism or anti-racism, there needs to be a lot of consciousness raising work involved in doing something like that, as well as the actual practicalities of getting work out.
So everyone in the room needs to raise consciousness. Yeah, everyone.
Like shared, like reading critically, I think needs to be really important as part of the process of writing.
And for me, I would just say that, just going back to Tarek's point as well, that just keep writing. Everyone is unique in the story that they need to tell. And if you don't tell that story, somebody else is going to come and do it for you. So, we are very privileged that we have a platform where we can write without being oppressed or persecuted like they are in other countries. We can get our stories out there, and we have to find and support these other independent, smaller publishing houses that could help grow us, as you were saying. So I think keep writing.
And actually, just as a last point, for the voice of common words.
I would quote Lemn Sissay, who's on tonight. If you've got tickets at Contact Theatre, he did a show that Benji Reed danced to. The line that I remember is "Be like water." You can flow around all problems if you be like water. Figure out what the problem is, flow around it, under it, over it. But don't stop, keep going, and we'll get there.
And if there's enough of you, we'll learn to walk away. Okay, that's it. We are pretty much bang on time. Thank you for coming. Please go to our website, which is obviously www.cultureword.org.uk. If you live in Manchester, we have a Black Writers workshop on Wednesday night, 7 while 9. I would encourage people to come along. The more people that can come, the more people can support each other, the quicker we can grow the response. So, thank you.
Thank you.